Everyone, and welcome to another of our Impact International Safety Calls. We're thrilled to have you here with us this morning. A lot going on in the world of safety for ironworker men and women, and this subject we're going to be talking about this morning is certainly something that I believe is pertinent to no matter what trade someone might be in, or whether you're tying rebar, erecting steel, doing curtain wall, whatever it may be. We're going to be talking today about accelerated work schedules, and we're seeing them seem to be increasing on jobs and what they're demanding of iron workers and other tradespeople out there, to where it's getting to where jobs are working 7-10, sometimes even 7-12s, and we're really beginning to see fatigue set in, things that are affecting the health and safety of iron workers, men and women out there. So along with that, we're going to lead into things discussing tool tethering and other things that we're beginning to see that are being used by some controlling contractors and some owners to aggressively push these schedules. So as always, we're looking forward to your questions. We want to be able to answer them. You'll see down somewhere on your screen, usually on the bottom, there's a question and answer tab. I would ask that you use that. There's also a chat tab. I'm not going to be monitoring the chat tab, but if you certainly want to use that to discuss things amongst yourself, you certainly can. But if you've got a question you'd like answered by our panel, use that tab, please. Again, great panel we have. We have some guest speakers with us this morning. We have Steve Rank from the Safety Department, and we have with us General President Eric Dean, who's going to be give a few words here as we open up. So with that, I'm going to welcome Eric to our program. And Eric, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pete. And as always, I appreciate your dedication towards doing this every month, along with our safety department. You guys are bringing a lot of value, whether it was COVID, whether it's industry-related issues, and Steve's department, they're on it. And they don't just serve the union, they serve the employers. We used to have the safety department as a sole set of the Ironworkers Union. We have intentionally moved them over through Impact so they can serve both labor and management. So to all of you that are joining the call, I appreciate you being here. Appreciate your daily dedication to the lives of members. So whether you're a labor leader, ironworker union rep, or a contractor, every one of you has a responsibility to look after the interests of our men and women of our union. So the two subjects today are near and dear to my heart. We talk about falling objects. What's old is what's new. Iron workers have always worked aloft and above other building trades and above other iron workers. We've developed means and methods that were established, erection procedures, whether it be for the structural steel, for rebar, for curtain wall, missed metals, you name it. What's changed is the interpretation by the regulatory agencies on what the means and methods are for doing a job safely. Historically, we used to lay out planks on steel erection jobs every 2 floors. We'd make sure that we were protecting the workers beneath us from falling bolts or objects, and protecting the workers down below and the additional iron workers as we plumbed up and finished the erection of the building. It has since changed to where we try and deck as fast as possible those floors to offer that same protection. And then we get some crazy compliance directives out of federal OSHA and some of the states that say, you know what, you can erect iron as high as you want, as long as you're 100% tied off, but they're escaping the responsibility of protecting the workforce down below from falling objects. In addition, there are means and methods now to stop that, such as tool tethering and various things of that nature. So the issue for us is, how do we comply with safety regulations? How do we do it in a safe manner? And how do we navigate steel erection primarily, but reinforcing and curtain wall erection that keeps the workforce safe on the job site, the workers, the other fellow tradespeople down below safe, and how do we do it in a way that doesn't make the hazards that we're preventing greater than the hazards were there in the first place. I can tell you from tool tethering, my son's about a 7-year iron worker now. On his very first job, tool tethers were required, and he had his personal lanyard and 7 tool tethers to work on some penthouse iron around a perimeter to tie in the curtain wall. And he said, Dad, you know, things are getting tangled and twisted and snagged. And I know that that's going to be a subject today. So we just got to find out when the hazard is greater than the one that previously existed. And then the other one is this compressed schedule. We all know time is money. And we want to perform in the most profitable way for the owners, for our contractors who get those jobs. But these compressed schedules are wearing our members to the grind. They're grinding them to a halt. We are erecting major tonnage in the most compressed schedules we've ever seen to date. We're working, as Pete said, 7 days a week. There's only so much in the tank of any human being of amount of physical labor that they can do. There's known data and studies about the effectiveness, both from a safety standpoint and from a productivity standpoint. So we just need to figure out a way to be compliant and to get these jobs done in the expedited time. But what it does is it puts pressure on union halls to have this grundle, a large available workforce for one job, sometimes 2 and 3 times the normal amount of what was a steel erection crew or curtain wall crew for that matter, or a reinforcing crew, to get the work done in an inordinate amount of time. So I appreciate the subject matter experts that are going to talk about these issues and how they affect not only the workforce, but you, the employer. And we don't want to harm your safety record, but more importantly, we got human capital we got to worry about. So Pete and Steve, I thank you greatly for what you're going to talk about today. And for the over 400 people who registered, I thank you for the daily task of keeping our members safe. I'll shut up and get out of the way and listen to the experts talk. Thank you very much. Appreciate you all.
All right. Thank you, Eric. It's good to hear that. I love the unity we have from management to the union in the idea of just what Eric said. We're seeing these compressed work schedules, what it's doing to the employees. The human body can take just so much. So I reiterate exactly what Eric said, and I'm looking forward to this topic and the discussion that goes with it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce from the Ironworkers International, Director of Safety and Training, Mr. Steve Rank. Steve has a PowerPoint presentation, is going to walk us through this and introduce our guest coming up. So good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Pete. And just to echo what General President Dean said, we appreciate all you do. You give a lot of time to this, to make this happen, to bring these issues to the table. So you're a great host, Pete, and we appreciate everything you do. As you heard by General President Dean, he understands these safety issues very well. And so we appreciate his support in the safety department to address issues, whether the deadly dozen hazards or regulatory issues around the country. It doesn't take much time to tee up the issue, and he gets it. So appreciate all his support and things that we have to do to make our members safe on the project. So the topic today is accelerated work schedules, falling objects, and tool tethering. And unfortunately, struck-bys remains one of the ironworkers' deadly dozen hazards. And as you can see here on the slide, number 8, it's struck-by injuries from falling objects, tools, and equipment. Unfortunately, I regret that we lost a member this year due to a struck-by incident. It was no fault of our own, but another construction trade on the project dropped something, misrigged something, and it came down and killed our member. So it's very near and dear to us, and we want to address this within our organization and also work with our partners out there on the job site, the project owners, the general contractors, and our contractors to address these issues. And struck-by still remains one of the 4 leading causes of construction fatalities. That has not changed in 30 years, 40 years. It's falls struck by, caught between, and electrical. So as we go through this today, you can see these job site, some simple examples where we have to take steps to make sure that we can eliminate and abate these hazards on the project. Before we get started though, I wanted to introduce the safety department we have with us today. We have Wayne Crissup, the district safety representative based in New London, Ohio. We have Jeff Norris, the Canadian Safety Coordinator. His office is in Alberta. And supporting all of us is Christy Rose, United States Administration for the Safety Department, and also Sandy Lestuska. She's the Canadian Administration Assistant that helps us and Jeff throughout Canada. So when you see these names, and folks, this is who the Safety Department is. At the bottom, you'll see where you can contact us. At the very last slide today, you'll see our new contact number and email address where you can contact us 24/7, and one of us will get back to you immediately. We have two guest speakers today. We have Rusty Brown, the Environmental Health and Safety Director for Kiewit Power Constructors, that's going to talk about him being a builder with multi-trades under their employment. They have to deal with falling objects, not only with the ironworkers, but all the other trades that they have thousands of as their employees. So he's going to address this from his perspective. And also with us today is Tony Hannon. He's a corporate safety director for Schuff Steel. He's going to be coming at this from a perspective of dealing with serious issues on multiple projects, dealing with accelerated work schedules, trade stacking, people coming underneath us. So Tony's going to give us a lot of real life examples of situations he's been in and how to best handle them. So we're really pleased that both of these gentlemen are with us today. So here's just a brief overview of the topics we're going to discuss today, and we want your input. I see we already have some questions for the audience. So Pete, Wayne, Jeff, Christy, please interrupt us at any time if there's any questions on any of these slides, because we want to reach out and share these questions with the audience. First thing is the OSHA standards. What OSHA standards apply to falling object protection, not only from the employer and the steel erector, but also for controlling contractors? We're going to take a look at those. Project trends, as General President Dean mentioned, the new trend of using tool tethering for all ironworkers, all tools and activities. We're going to talk about that. Compliance issues. Tool tethering is no substitute for complying with controlling contractor requirements. We're going to take a look at that. Lessons learned on all these situations we're going to discuss today. Accelerated work schedules mandated by project owners and controlling contractors, which has been the root cause of many of the serious incidents that we've read in the news on a lot of mega projects across the nation. That accelerated work schedules was a common thread with all these serious fatalities and incidents. Then we're going to talk about the roles of supervision. Who on your job site working for your under your employment is going to take the right corrective action when trades are coming in underneath us during the steel erection process, or if we have falling object hazards. So the roles of supervision, we have to entrust with them that not only do they know how to erect the buildings, but they have to know the standards that apply, and also their roles and responsibilities as supervisors in the workplace. Earlier this year, Pete hosted one of these national safety calls that dealt with specifically the roles and responsibilities of supervisors in the workplace. And I just got to say one thing. By a court of law, by OSHA and the National Labor Relations Board, foremen, general foremen, and superintendents are not considered to be iron workers out of Local 1 Chicago or 396 St. Louis or wherever. They're considered to be company management representatives. Why? Because they've determined over 30, 40 years that they are acting in the interest of the employer, handling workers under their supervision. So therefore, roles of supervision play a very important role in what we're talking about today. So please submit any questions that you have. Also, written notifications. How do you respond? And notifications to general contractors or others that are treading on our turf, working beneath our steel erection activities. And so how do we respond to that? I'm sure Rusty and Tony will weigh in heavily on that. So let's take a look at just some of the basic falling object standards that we all have to comply with. Here's one that deals specifically with the employer. In this case, it could be a Pete Hayes, that's securing loose items aloft. All materials, equipment, and tools which are not in use while aloft shall be secured against accidental displacement. And below this, I put the preamble. So if you wanted any more explanation as to the intent of the standard, you see it right on your screen. But this opens up a whole different issue. Take a look at the picture on the left, okay? You see the connector there has his beater next to his left boot, okay? You see he has a bucket of bolts up ahead, up above him that's tied off. The question that's coming up on the job site is that beater in use, and should that beater be tied off using a tool tether? Yes or no? What does the standard say? We just read the standard says you have to secure them if they're not being used. So the issue is, in this particular instance, is this tool in use? Our answer is yes. But how do we articulate that and explain that to a safety person working on the behalf of a project owner or controlling contractor, okay? Look at the picture on the right. Typical connector. Look at its tool scabbard. It's got a sleever bar. It's got his spud wrenches in there. Does that constitute a falling object hazard? Yes or no? Is that tool being used, or should it be tied off because he doesn't have his hand on it, pulling it out, ready to stab it in a hole and make that beam to column connection? That's the second issue we got to keep in mind as we move forward here today. Two basic common situations. Next, don't forget the planking of floor openings. It's one of the first lines of defense, all right? You can put tools, materials on it, but as you come up multi-tiered buildings, you have to take some measures to prevent falling objects to people, other trades below you. Common practice we cannot overlook right here. So now let's get into a more specific standard that pertains to falling objects, and that is this. When we rewrote the Subpart R steel erection standards under negotiated rulemaking, because our organization, the Ironworkers International, and back then the NEA, the National Erectors Association, pushed the Department of Labor to allow us to sit at the table to write the new steel erection standards. And one of the issues that came up is we have no control over people that work below us. So the committee, the CENRAC committee, developed this standard here, which says the controlling contractor shall bar other construction processes below steel erection unless overhead protection is provided below, okay? Now, if you want to read more about that, here's the preamble to this. And the issue has been this. Does this standard say that the steel erector has the responsibility of putting up barricades? Does it say that the steel erector has to make sure that people they have to take measures to make sure people don't walk underneath us? No, it doesn't. Look at the standard, look at the preamble, and know that this is a controlling contractor requirement, that they shall bar other trades beneath us, okay? And this is something that Tony's going to speak to later, and unfortunately he's had a lot of issues with on previous projects. So here are common situations that we're going to talk about where our work area on left and right, as you'll see here, we're maintaining a tightly planked deck. There's no other trades beneath us, and yet we've used large nets to comply with the standard of maintaining a tightly planked or netted floor every 2 floors or 30 feet. However, one thing we got to keep in mind is these fall protection nets are not debris nets, okay? It'll catch a come along, it'll catch some big tools that may not fall between the 3-inch by 3-inch netting. But what about the smaller stuff? What about bullpens, spud wrenches, things like this that could fall through there? So we got to keep this in mind too. But these two pictures here are common situations where we need the cooperation of the controlling contractor not to bring other trades up there when we're doing this work activity. Same thing that goes here. We're erecting iron. Yes, there are standards about pre-planning routes to make sure that no employees are required to work beneath these suspended loads, except for the iron workers that are hooking and unhooking the load. That's the only exception that we have here, okay? But in the case to the left here, we need the cooperation to keep people off of this deck, this erection floor, to prevent falling object hazards. And as you can see, this deck is tightly decked. So that's the first line of defense on falling objects, is this picture to the left, a tightly planked and decked floor. It's one of the best first lines of defense to protect workers in the workplace. And this is just enough to wet your beak, because we're going to get into this more with our guest speakers. But here's the trend going on, tool tethering. It's not a substitute for complying with the falling object standard and barring other people beneath the steel erection process. And here's a trending issue. Some projects have asserted that tool tethering can be a substitute for complying with the OSHA standard that prohibits all construction flows. Not true. Do not fall into this trap. It is not a substitute. You can do both, but you can't take away not complying with the standard. Any questions so far?
So yeah, Steve, we've got some here. The first one I could probably tackle. Todd asked, contractor participation is required for any falling object program. What language should he use in our proposals to protect ourselves? Well, Todd, we can't give you legal advice here, but I can tell you that we're going to see more and more of this passed down to subcontractors and others on the job, language in pre-bid scopes and in contracts that pushes more of this onto us, which Steve has already talked about, that really falls outside of what OSHA says. But I would say it's something that everyone needs to look into. What do you need to do to protect yourself? So reach out to your legal and do that. He also talks about many GCs think tethering is the answer because they don't want to participate in the costs. Again, something we're gonna discuss what's going on there. Russell McCreary just throws out the standard. That's exactly what you've just talked about. The tools which are not in use shall be secured. It does not say while being used. So that is that language that can be a little bit gray, like when you use the beater on the beam. Is that tool being used or not at that point in time? And
Right.
then one more here. Again, this is one that I think is kind of a gray zone, but it says, does the steel erector need to net or provide perimeter protection for other trades or the general public? Again, many times that's project specific. And the answer can be a little gray, but Steve, what do you think of that? Is there anything in the standard or anything that says that needs to be done?
There's nothing in the standard that requires us to protect the public or entities that are outside the scope of the standard. We have to do our diligence and make sure that we do the decking, make sure that we tie off tools that are aloft that are not being used, okay? Then we have the controlling contractors have to bar people beneath us. But you're right, Pete, there are these situations of working on the perimeter of the building. If you're in downtown Minneapolis or Chicago, what measures are going to be taken to make sure that the perimeter protection, I know Rusty and Tony are going to get involved into this heavily here in a few minutes, is perimeter protection. We agree that tying off everything when we're working on a float, putting 48 bolts in a splice plate in these tree columns would require us tying off these tools and everything else, okay? But then we're going to talk about to the interior of the building and what's those differences and what considerations should be addressed to bifurcate the exterior of the building, public exposures, versus interior of the building with a tightly planked deck floor where you don't have that exposure. So that's what we have to communicate with our customers, our general contractors. Hopefully they'll bifurcate that, not paint us with one broad brush that you got to do it all the time no matter what, okay? Thanks, Pete, for those questions. Anything else on the list at this time?
Looks like one just popped in. It looks like a Canadian question.
Okay.
Maybe Jeff would like to tackle that one. Jeff, if you can, it says Canadian contractors are in a bit of a pickle. Our provincial regulations do not have a Subpart R or similar type of regulation that specifically calls out the process of steel erection.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Well, currently in Canada, OHS is regulated under a variety of mechanisms across the country: acts, regulations, standards, guidelines, codes. So through these instruments, essentially 14 different jurisdictions across the country of Canada. So the answer to that question is it's regional. And so we don't have a federal standard other than the federal standard for government projects, for example. But the falling object topic, industry is pushing for legislation requiring workplaces to implement dropped object programming. And that does include tool tethering processes. So what we're probably going to do with this topic is we're going to regionalize it to each province with our lunch and learns. So I would ask that caller to stay tuned for a lunch and learn in their jurisdiction.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Looks like that's it for now, Steve.
Great. And thanks for your question there, Russell.
Hey, Steve, I've got one that came in on this is Wayne. I have one that came in under the chat. It reads from Chris. It reads, I have seen where tethering has been more hazardous to workers and iron workers. Has this looked at or been discussed being added into Subpart R? So that would necessitate reopening the standard. Steve, you want to?
Right. No, it has never been discussed or even proposed to add to Subpart R. To do that, you'd have to open up the whole standard and go through a whole rulemaking process, okay? I think that the best bet is to use it on a case-by-case issue where it requires this tool tethering to protect pedestrians, or in cases where this is the best method of protection, we're going to use it, okay? But I wouldn't want it to be a standard and to talk about the greater hazard situations, and without getting into any specific incidents, yes, we have had incidents regarding tool tethers snagging and hanging up on things and causing our iron workers to fall. It wasn't the lack of fall protection that made them fall. It was the fact that their tool tether lanyard got snagged on something and jerked them back, and that caused the fall. Okay, so we have to be very careful about mandating 100% of anything. There's always going to be certain situations where this one particular tool or piece of equipment may not be the best choice. So we got to have safety people in here, like all you fine people and Russell out there and the rest of you, to evaluate when you need to use the safety equipment and when is it not required. Okay, I hope that answered the question. So with us today, our first guest speaker is Rusty Brown from Kansas City, home of the Kansas City Chiefs, and he's going to share with us today his project policies and procedures and his successes with falling object protection, with having multiple trades under their employment from Kiewit. They do mega projects throughout the nation. They have literally thousands of employees under their direct employment. So he's going to talk about falling object protections as well as considerations for tool tethering. So everyone, please welcome Rusty Brown.
Thanks, Steve. Hey, first of all, just to kind of talk a little bit about tool tethering. You know, tool tethering to us is not a substitute for working under iron workers. So when we're doing steel erection, we do not allow people to work stacked or staggered in those systems. A couple things come to mind there. One is scheduling your work, making sure that we're not around the iron workers as they're erecting steel. Nuts and bolts and things like that, you can't tie those things off. Whether you put debris nets or not up is a question, but the best thing is to put an exclusion zone. So the second thing is setting that exclusion zone. An exclusion zone doesn't mean red tape. That's a physical barrier that needs to be erected around the zone where the ironworkers are working. The other thing I wanted to make a point to is tool tethers are not needed when there's three things there. One, you're an arm's length from the edge. Two, that you have a fully decked or planked surface. And three, the handrail is guarded to the midrail. So you have to have all three things there. Again, at arm's length, so I'm 6'5", so an arm's length is about 3.5 feet. And then fully decked and planked, and then the handrail is guarded to the midrail. We've been asked several times, how did we come up with having the handrail guarded to the midrail? Where did that come from? Well, it came from several studies that we did. We looked at different ways that things were leaving elevation. So we basically did a bunch of studies, and we found that guarding to the midrail and not to the top rail, most items were stopped at the toe board level, and then some items went to the top of the midrail, but we did not have anything go between the midrail and the top rail. Not to say that could never happen, but if you're an arm's length back, the risk potential has been greatly reduced to a 1, and so that's how we came up with that particular rule. The last thing that I wanted to just stress, and this is something that I've seen, several of the pictures even in the presentation, is we've been pushing the manufacturers for tool tether anchorage points. All too often we find when we do have a drop tool in our business, we see that it has been tethered. Either the anchorage point failed or the tether itself failed. Tethering in itself is not something that we go to immediately and say, well, this is going to save all of our workers. There's a lot of other engineering controls that you can use, and tool tethering, like PPE, is the last resort, not the first. So we need to be very careful there during steel erection when we're working with tool tethers. Yeah, this is a great example right here. As you can see, the top right, this is an attachment that was put on to the tool. And if the manufacturer provided a tether point like the beater there in the middle, you have a lot less chance of human error coming into play. The tool at the bottom left, as you can see, if the manufacturer provided a spot for anchorage point, that particular tool tether in itself, in our experience, as you beat that tool through on that pin, sometimes you can strike that particular tool tether and that plastic piece break off. That either becomes loose, or you hit or strike that nylon and with your beater, and then it just completely becomes detached from your tool pouch or to your wristlets. So we have to push the manufacturers to provide anchorage points for our tools. And we've been working with a lot of manufacturers. There's a myriad of them that we work with, from DeWalt and Milwaukee. We've also worked with Snap-on hand tools, and within DeWalt and Milwaukee's hand tool line and power tool side as well. So trying to change the industry versus just being another player in the industry has become kind of a mission of mine, to try to help people understand that we do have some problems in the industry. So again, tool tethering, last line of defense, not the first line of defense. Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Rusty. Also, I wanted you to talk a little bit about this issue. I'm going to page back up here. And this is an issue that General President Dean brought up, that one of the first basic staple requirements that's been an OSHA standard since 1971, okay, before you graduated from Warrensburg, Missouri Safety Department, Rusty, okay,
Just a couple years.
This standard here that says a fully planked deck or net shall be maintained within 2 floors or 30 feet, which is less, directly under any erection being performed, okay? This was another standard that we wanted to have carried over from 1971 to the new Subpart R steel erection standard that went to effect in 2001, okay? And in the preamble of that, it was OSHA's rationale that having this deck in provides falling object protections to ironworkers and other construction trades on multi-story structures. We agree with this, and I know Kiewit does too. Kiewit would never erect a building looking like this, would you, Rusty? With no decking, nothing.
No, what's interesting about, if you look at this particular picture, what we found out is it actually, let's take the human error out of it for a minute. In this particular picture, it actually costs us more to erect all the grading and the floor decking when it's installed like this. So typically what we do is we'll fly sections up, so it would probably put a larger crane out and fly a whole section of decking up with all the steel and everything already intact. So reducing our costs and our exposure. And when you have that full decking, whether it's grading or not, if it's grading, you already have the protection already put on the grading as it's flown up and put into place. Yeah.
But thanks, Rusty. But this has been an issue that continues to be a source of confusion, costly project delays, unnecessary litigation, and sadly, it's been a primary causation factor in fatalities and serious incidents. And don't think our organization hasn't approached the Department of Labor on this, not once, not twice, but about 9 times on formal meetings to show them, to explain to them that their compliance directive that you see right here, folks, and their interpretation letter is effectively removing protections for iron workers and other construction people on multi-tiered projects, period. They think by this letter and their compliance directive that a, quote, 100% fall protection is a substitute for maintaining a tightly planked and deck floor every 2 floors and 30 feet, all right? It is absolutely not. It's creating more hazards in the workplace by this latest letter that came out from the director of the construction department, where you see here that they're talking about the 1926-754B3 standard that requires a tightly planked and decked or netted floor, saying here that in essence, okay, oh, well, you have to evaluate fall protection, and we're going to allow our compliance officers to make that decision when they get on a job site, whether complying with the standard or 100% fall protection, it's going to be their discretion. They don't have that discretion. We have a very specific rule, a line item standard that requires a tightly planked deck or netted floor, end of story. There's no substitute for that. But yet this enforcement directive here, and you can see at the title, top of the title here, it says enforcement of steel erection subpart R, okay? Whenever an agency says this is the way we're going to interpret the standard and this is the way we're going to enforce it, when their interpretation enforcement letters crosses the way we do business, you better believe we're going to be approaching them. And we have, and we're presently engaged with discussions right now to get the agency to finally rescind this misguided compliance directive that we can't have continue exist, okay? Now, if you want to tie off 100% at 2 feet, that's fine, but do not take away our decking. That's there for a platform for rescue. It's there for falling object protection, and also limits falls and other things that could happen during the erection of multi-tiered buildings. So I know that both Shuff Steel Today and Kiewit don't subscribe to these kind of underground rulemaking letters that effectively remove safety provisions for ironworkers. Rusty, have you had anyone approach you, say, well, we have this letter of interpretation, so we don't think that we have to provide decking? Has this come up within your organization?
No, it has not.
That's probably because you have control of the whole site with direct hire of your ironworkers and the way you're going to wreck the building and the project, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we're really pleased to have some experienced people here, and this is yet another issue that's tied into the falling object issue that we cannot allow to have misinterpretation on. And we don't want any of our contractors here that are with us today, or local union people, to give any credibility to this letter that you see right here, okay? It has absolutely no legal standing in a court of law. It's an interpretation letter. It is not a standard, okay? And there's no justification in the standard or the preamble that would give the agency any kind of leeway to write this kind of letter. Okay, so we got to be real clear on that when we talk about falling object hazards and these situations on these buildings. And here's a close-up of different common tool tethering devices that Jeff North sent me, as well as the previous picture. Okay, of in action, different manufacturers, different types of tool tethering here. We see a lot of manufacturers making this, Rusty. I know that you get inundated with salespeople from different organizations wanting to show you the latest, greatest, and I agree with you. These anchorage points, if they're hard plastic, either cold weather or getting them hit with a beater or something else is going to cause them to break and fail. Okay, so these are just some common photos of what's being required in some instances around the country. Any further questions?
Yeah, Steve, I saw just on there was a chat question in there,
Okay.
and somebody put on there, you know, tool tethering's been around about 12 years, and yeah, it's been around for a while. It's actually a lot longer than that. We found out the first tool tethering was in the 70s with NASA in space. That's where a lot of the tool tethering has started from, and then it went into the nuclear industry and things like that. But what we found out during our investigation of a lot of these tool tethering companies is there's no legislation on how they test their products. And oftentimes we've gone back to independent laboratories and tested their products and found out the labels that they have on their tool tethers are inaccurate or incorrect. Always make sure that you do your independent studies. Make sure that you look for regulations around how these tool tethers and these anchorage points are designed, and if there is independent laboratory testing. The manufacturers like DeWalt, Milwaukee, Snap-on, those types of companies have actual standards behind how they test their anchorage points and their lanyards for their tools. Other companies like 3M, specifically on the Python line, since they've acquired Python, there is an enormous amount of testing going on with those products now. Previously, some of the products were tested, but again, there was no regulation, and there still is no regulation around that. Recently, I've asked both Wayne and Steve to join me on the ANSI Z359 committee for fall protection due to two things. One, fall protection for ironworkers, but the second thing is fall protection for tools. There is no legislation, there is no standard, and it would be awesome if the ironworkers and Kiewit would pilot a program to have fall protection for tools added to the ANSI Z359 standard. So with that, Steve, I appreciate the time, appreciate you having us.
Good point, Rusty. Good point.
Rusty,
And Rusty, wait a second. Rusty, this is another reason why we really appreciate you being on our Safety and Health Roundtable. I know you shared this with us. To that subject that he was just talking about, Rusty participates in the ANSI A10 construction standards that Wayne and I are very involved in. And the ironworkers are subgroup chairs of 3 committees currently. And we're really pleased to have Rusty there on these ANSI committees, working with the Z359 and other committees to bring us to the table. So yes, we'll accept working with you anytime, Rusty. Wayne, go ahead. You got a question.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions or comments that came in I wanted to throw out here. Rusty, you talked about the standards, and there is an ANSI ISEA, which is the Equipment Association standard for dropped object protection that was put out in 2018. But I think there are some limitations with that ISEA standard that are there that we could address, and that was some of the questions that were posed was, and you answered, which is, you know, the amount of weight that those tethers can handle, and so that there's also a safe braking strength that if somebody is pulled into something that will also give that breakaway so that they're not pulled into a piece of equipment or machinery.
Absolutely. If you look at the tool tethering on to the right, the one that's holding the 2 wrenches to the to that leather pouch. You know, that's an example of someone made that. There's a manufacturer, someone's gone into business with that. I've seen this particular pouch before, but you know, what do the buckles hold? What does the snaps hold? You know, what will that actually provide to a worker if it gets snagged or hooked onto something? Will that rip them off? Will it cause them to be imbalanced and fall from the steel? And those are real concerns that we have right now as looking at tool tetherings. We've gone the gamut with tool tethers, like President Dean said, with his own son, you know, having tool tethers hanging off of you. The most we've counted is 14 off an individual. It adds additional weight. It adds snagging. I mean, there is some definite concern about the amount of tools that we require tethering. And should we look at tethering more as a last resort as an industry, or is this something we just require everyone to do and not do good hazard analysis and really figure out what the workers really need when they go up to do their work?
I agree with you, Rusty. I think doing a job hazard analysis gives you, as a safety professional, an opportunity to evaluate if you're going to work on the perimeter of a building in a downtown Chicago, Kansas City area. Of course, that would be a primary consideration in your job hazard analysis, right? But not in cases where you're working in the middle of a deck that's half the size of a football field. It's completely planked and decked, and no other trades are allowed up there because it's an erection floor.
That's right.
So we need to move towards this common ground of common sense to evaluate and bifurcate these situations. And there's not a one size fits all, okay? And that's what gets us frustrated and our contractors and our members frustrated, is when we get on a project, they want to paint us with some broad brush when maybe the application doesn't warrant this type of requirement. So that's the situations we run into, right, Rusty?
Absolutely. There's a question William Beck asked: is there a distance outside the work footprint that a controlled access zone should be for deflection of a falling object? And I would tell you that's a really good question. If you have a fully decked or planked floor and you have your guarding up to the mid-rail and the handrail, what we typically will do is just have a minimum setback, and then we'll add K-rail, fencing, or other structures. And that's not necessarily to prevent the falling objects. It is to prevent people from going underneath during steel erection. So is there a setback? I will tell you that when we've dropped objects from different heights, we found that they will go 1.5 to 2 times the height of the area that you're dropping it off for deflection. So if you're 200 feet up, I mean, you be 400 feet out. So we got to be very careful when we talk about deflection of a tool. And again, making sure that we engineer that out so people don't have extra tool tethers, that you have fully decked and you have at least up to the mid-rail and the handrail guarded. But again, that protection, that exclusion zone with K-rail, wood, plywood, fences, things like that, are to keep people out from underneath the iron workers when they're doing steel erection.
Very good points on deflection, those calculations. Those are all important considerations. One of the things that we've heard specifically here, where we get our biggest pushback from, are connectors who have these 11 lanyards on them. And then I don't know if your 11 incorporated the 2 lanyards on their D-ring in the middle of their back for fall rest. I don't know if those 2 lanyards were part of the 11. So now we've got 13, right? And so our connectors dealing with incoming loads, in many cases, they're working in the blind. The crane operator could be 12 floors below, out of sight. They got a phone man there giving verbal signals. And then you know better than anyone, if you've got a half a second delay, that could result in boom deflection or swing, which could be 8-10 feet in just a half a second or a second. And the tool tethers, and what we're hearing from connectors, in some cases, they feel like they're more worried about getting out of the way and something hanging up at their work point. And I don't know exactly what their work point it could get hung up on, but they've expressed concerns about that their main focus is on incoming loads and making that beam to comm connection and securing it, okay? So that's the feedback that we get from connectors. Not that they're trying to pick a fight with anyone, Rusty, but that's some of the feedback we get from the guys that are doing beam to comm connections. Didn't know if you had any comments about that, Rusty.
Steve, can you hear me?
Yes.
Steve and Rusty, we have a note here from Forrest that he was talking about the compliance directive, which was written 2012 and has become
Yes.
the standard being referenced by union, non-union erection companies along with GCs. With this letter being around for 12 years, how do we see having success to get it changed? We've been defending the 2 floors, 30-foot standard as the rule, but get shut down with this letter. We lost a project due to not being willing to erect above the 2 floors, 30-foot rule. The norm is being changed by this letter. And I was hoping that not only Steve, I know you'll want to talk about that, but maybe Rusty from his position at Kiewit, how it's being addressed. And I believe you talked about it earlier pretty thoroughly as well. But I know you self-perform a lot of that work, but if you have any of that done, how else do you address it?
Yeah, remember, letters of interpretation are not promulgated into law through Congress. They're not voted on. They are literally someone's interpretation. Those interpretations, as you can see, if you go to the standard, they'll disappear from time to time. They'll be archived, no longer valid. Just because somebody wrote a letter of interpretation does not make that law. And keep that in mind when someone throws this in your face as, oh, this is the way that OSHA views this. No, this is how one person viewed it, and then that information got put up on their website. You know, don't be afraid to go back to Steve and Ironworkers and ask them to challenge these types of things, because all the time, I mean, it's monthly I see where letters are taken down or removed or archived because the information is no longer, quote, valid. So how we go around working around stuff like this is during the erection process, we make sure that we plan our work, and typically on our jobs, they're not stick build. We've already designed it. We designed it that the floors go up with the steel, and we find it's a lot more cost effective. It's a lot less risk on our employees, and it's a lot easier to put together that way versus the stick build, the old customary style of putting things together. If you go to a lot of our jobs where we have a lot of large buildings, you'll see a lot more cranes on it. Kiewit has the largest private crane fleet in the nation, and there's a reason for that. So when we do come up against situations where we're erecting, whether it's being a power plant or in a building, things like that, you'll see that we have multiple cranes set up for these types of situations, so we don't have to worry about all the netting and those types of things. When you put the netting up, then you have another risk of taking all that netting down. So that's probably the simplest answer I would have, Steve.
Well, that's a really good answer. I'd like to comment on Force's question is, well, this has been in effect, this letter since 2012, 9 years. This has been around. So what is going to change this? Well, Forrest, what's going to change this is getting the right people in place to get OSHA to have to answer for this. And we've been very diplomatic. We've gone in meetings. We went in there with our General President Emeritus, Mr. Wise and Mr. Hunt. And General President Dean went in there when he was General Secretary for Ironworkers International. We've gone a very diplomatic channel to address this and the disruption and serious hazards that this letter has caused, okay? So to answer your question, Forrest, the only thing the agency is going to understand is being put into a position where they're going to have to answer for this misguided policy. Without getting into details, I can tell you that there's things going on right now that between now and the general election that's going to get federal OSHA to answer this question. Is show me one word in the standard preamble that would give that agency, the director of construction, the reason to write this letter right here, and the reason on their CPL 0201048 to give this silly answer to why you don't have to comply with the steel erection standard. So Forrest, we're in the hunt. We're not giving up. Okay, we've been waiting for our time to strike, and that's coming soon. So hope I have a good answer from you. If we do, I'm sure that we're going to have a letter sent out from General President Dean announcing that this has been resolved once and for all. That's my hope. That's our goal.
And Steve, just another quick answer to Forrest. You know, this Lauren Sweat is who we sit next to in a lot of these conferences. She's the acting assistant Secretary of Labor, and she's very much someone that I reach out to on a regular basis and ask questions about things like this. And you know, Jim retired a few years ago. We have a new director of construction that we've been inviting to the ANSI 810 standards. So it'd be interesting to hear what he has to say, maybe at one of the next meetings, see if he agrees with this or not.
Well, guess what? 1 year ago this month, Wayne Cressup and I and General Treasurer Bill Dean from the Ironworkers International had a meeting with Ms. Lauren Sweat. We had a meeting with Scott Ketchum, the director of the, and we brought this very issue up along with multiple pictures of VA hospital, federally funded jobs, up 8, 12 stories with no decking. And guess what Ms. Sweat's response was, Rusty Brown?
What's that?
Oh, I knew nothing about this. Scott, can you brief me on this? She had no idea this was going on. Scott did. So we've been after the director of construction to respond to us, but I regret that after multiple emails, requests, the agency has never responded to this issue because they know they can't, and they won't until they're pressured, okay?
Yep.
We're only asking them to follow their own standard and get out of this underground rulemaking practice that's caused all this confusion. That's all. So yes, Wayne and I and General Treasurer Dean have met with Ms. Sweat and Mr. Ketchum, and we've reached out to them on multiple occasions, but they have been radio silent. The question is, why? It's because they can't defend their position, Rusty, all right?
Understood.
They want the clock to run out till after November 3rd to give us some response on why they are justifying this.
Yeah.
But there is no justification. So thank you, Rusty, for that, Wayne, and everyone else for us for your comments on this. Is there any more questions before we go on to the next slide? Our next guest speaker. Anything in the chat box?
Yes, this is Wayne. Steve, there is another one that came in. This is from Todd. He wants to know, is equipment tie-off the same as tool tethering? You want to address equipment versus tools?
Yeah, it's a separate standard under the very first one that we mentioned at the very top of the hour here, and I'll go back to that very quick, is if you're using mag drills, you're using equipment, and here's the standard. It says, securing loose items aloft, all materials, equipment, and tools. Equipment could be a mag drill, okay? So this is a specific standard that deals with materials, equipment, and tools, okay? That's separate from, what we're dealing with, but it flows over into the tool tethering. So this has been a long-standing standard here since 1971 about securing items aloft. I hope that answers this question, Wayne. Okay, we'll go back down here. So now we've talked about regulations, we've talked about falling object hazards, we've talked about tool tethering, and now we're going to bring the third ingredient in this recipe that often leads to serious incidents is accelerated work schedules, okay? So we're really pleased to have with us today Tony Hannon, the Corporate Safety Director for Shove Steel, who has lived and breathed this on mega projects throughout the country on accelerated work schedules. So everyone, please welcome Tony Hannon.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate you and Aaron Dean for allowing us the time to speak on this issue. Some of the stuff that, Pete was talking about earlier and Rusty, as far as it goes to tool tethering, barricading, your 2 floors are 30 feet. The 2 floors are 30 feet. We live that, I don't know how often. Traveling the country, we see it more often than not, that it continues to happen. One of the issues that we run into subbing out sub-erection work is we'll have sub-erectors say, we're just not doing that. And our take is, then we'll just find somebody else that will, because that's just the way it has to be. The accelerated work schedules, where we're at today and how fast things are moving, projects that used to be slated at 26 weeks are now at 13 weeks, and they still expect you to deliver it on time. Obviously, sales guys within the industry, whether it's Shuff or anybody else, are out there selling that we can make that happen without thinking about what it's doing to our members, the hours that our members are putting in. So if you're building a job at 13 weeks with 100 guys and half of those are booming out and they're working 7 days a week, when do they ever have time to actually take a breath, breathe, wash their clothes, heaven forbid, over a 7-day work schedule, right? So that's just something as an industry as a whole, up and down the chain from sales to marketing, estimating, that we just need to push back even harder to the owners, to the clients that says, we just can't make that happen continually, right?
Yes,
If it's a week
yes.
here, a week there, fair enough. But to continually do it month after month, job to job is definitely taking its toll on our workforce. Our workforce is getting older a lot faster. So guys that used to be able to hang around this industry for 25, 30 years, now after 12, 13 years, they're done. They're broke. And, long-term in our industry throughout the international, it is definitely starting to affect us. There's no question.
Yeah. Tony, I pulled this screen up here because I want to give you credit for just what you said. Shuff Steel puts their money where their mouth is when it comes to complying with the standard. So we have a picture here of Shuff Steel topping out, and as you can see, tightly planked deck floor and nets over those floor openings. You see that? So Tony, thank you for holding the line. Thank you for complying with the standard. Thank you for protecting our members working for Shuff Steel and even people below them that don't work for you. So this is a great illustration of just the issue we were talking about. But Tony,
Yeah.
I have a question for you. Go ahead and make a comment about this.
Yeah, but all of that you see there, Steve, goes out to the members, to the supervision, to the people that we entrust our work to the people that are accountable, to the people that they work for, right? And who work for them. So, the kudos on that goes to the people putting the building up.
Right. So Tony, a few years ago, you were under a lot of pressure from, and we're not going to say who the controlling contractor was, but they were trying to manipulate Shuff Steel into continuing work under a project schedule that you disagreed with. So without getting into who it was, tell us what it was about, to share that with everyone, the situation.
Yeah, so the situation was really, everybody agreed to a schedule. Due to design changes, the owner came back and says, well, we want to accelerate the schedule, even though we added more scope to the work. In short, we came back to them and said, we just can't do X, Y, and Z. We're not going to put our workers in a place to where I have to work them 7/12s for 36 straight weeks without a day off, because that's really what the new schedule, what they wanted. There's a happy compromise in there. I'm fairly certain the aftermath of that was, the client, the owner, not too thrilled with, what our return schedule was to them. But at the end of the day, it was very simple. We are going to make sure that our members have at least a day off. It doesn't mean that we won't work 7 days a week every now and then, but to work 7 days a week constantly for 4 or 5 months is just unrealistic. It's just not healthy. And that's not who we are.
Tony, you had another incident where they wanted to pour concrete, I think, in a portion of the floor that was just adjacent to where you were hanging iron. And that was separate from just what you described, but it was a pour schedule, I believe, where they just told you, well, we're close to you, but we're not directly beneath you. So that was the situation as well. Do you recall that?
Yeah, so, I mean, my memory's not as bad as some out there in the public eye these days, but it's still starting to fade a little bit. But, part of that, the trade stacking, if you will, and doing pours right next to us and going back to the tool tethering or the barricading of, our exclusion zone, if you will, is really being able to have a dialogue with the client, the owner, and say, look, for the safety of everybody, this is how we need to work, right? And I don't know why we don't have something that allows us to keep 2 floors between us and any other trade. 1 floor, there's still material that could easily go through some of the lighter decking material that we have out there. But I think 2 floors, it's, you're just providing that extra level of protection.
Yes.
Having trades on the same floor as us and separated by, whether you want to call it red rope, whether we use 3/8 cable that says, okay, from this side on is a working floor, this side on is they're going to be pouring over there. You know what? If I'm a crane operator and I need to boom away fairly quickly, I don't have time to get all those concrete guys out of the way. I just don't. So,
Correct.
you're creating a hazard for other trades along with creating hazards for our own members. And that's the, really the day-to-day fight that our superintendents, that are general foremen, live each and every day. And you know what? God bless them, because they're more politically correct than they were 10 years ago. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah. Well, great job. You mentioned a couple minutes ago, you said supervision, okay, that they are doing, making this work. So let's talk a little about the important role of supervisors, because when Tony's sitting in his office like he is today, he's already given instruction to your field supervision on the job hazard analysis, the site-specific erection plan. So Tony, talk a little bit about the importance of all contractors working with their supervision in the field.
So I think the supervision, the superintendent in today's world is so much, I wouldn't say burdened with paperwork or issues, but their responsibilities and what's put on their plate every single day is far more than what it used to be. 10, 15 years ago, it was just about building a building. Now it's about building a building, maintaining a schedule, doing payroll, making sure that my budget's hitting when it's supposed to hit, making sure that I have men coming in from the hall on a certain day to make sure that I can continue my schedule. So for the supervision out there through, obviously through the international and the training that the apprenticeship program gives us, in addition to that, is being able to spend time with them from a training standpoint, from a realistic standpoint. It says, this is what we need to do, whether it's job hazard analysis, daily pre-task, meetings with their hands, morning meetings, talking to the guys. There's nothing more effective on any job, anywhere, than to have a superintendent stand up and talk to their men and believe the passion that they're talking about when it comes to safety. And when they can take that dialogue and turn it into a positive with the client, with the owner, and have a constructive dialogue of, this is why we want to do it. We're not doing this just to be asses, if you will. We're doing this because it's for the betterment of everybody, not just us.
Good points. We're really pleased to have with us on the line today actual ironworker safety people that are out in the field. One of them is Russell McCreary on the West Coast. Then we have Pat McDermott from Boston on the East Coast. And when these two people and many others look into these incidents, it backs up to, well, this was Tony's policy, for example, but the foreman or general foreman or the superintendent didn't follow through and notify Tony that this hazard existed when maybe they should have. And these are some of the things that come up after the big one happens. And that's why it's very important for people like Tony, what Tony's doing right now, to make sure that they understand to call me if you see trade stacking on this project. At any time, if they encroach underneath this, you got to call a home office, right? So it's real important, like he said, is there's nothing better than communicating with your field supervision on how they're supposed to respond to these situations regarding flying objects, controlling contractor requirements, etc. Any comments on that, Tony?
No, I think the resources that the International provides us, obviously out west with Russell and the Western Steel Council, is definitely a great place for us to reach out to. you know, even on days where I really don't need you to step in, at least they're there to, you know, provide us for a sounding board or a place to vent and, you know, kind of walk us back off the ledge a little bit, if you will. Going back to some of the stuff that Rusty was talking about with tool tethering. Tool tethering to me is kind of like fall protection, the right piece for the right job, right? Not everything in fall protection needs a dual retractable, nor can I always use a 6-foot lanyard. Tool tethering is the same way. I think there's places for it that are absolutely necessary if you're building high rises in, you know, downtown, you know, cities, Chicago, LA, Seattle. There's definitely some companies out there that are doing their best to provide what they can to us. We're working with a couple companies to engineer tools directly for the ironworkers. So we've offered them opportunities to come into our facilities to do the testing, to go out into the field, to do real world, give it to the ironworkers, let them beat it, let them touch it, let them destroy it, get the feedback that says this works, this doesn't work, don't ever bring me that again. So and it's just real world, and they're very happy for it, and we're happy that at the end of the day, maybe I don't need 10 or 11 lanyards. Maybe I can get away with, in certain situations, with 2, and still be efficient with what I do without creating an additional hazard to the connectors. Because the connectors, as you well know, number one, we always need to leave them an out. And if I have them tethered to a tool that they can't get away from, they don't have an out anymore.
Correct. Really glad you recognize that, Tony, as well as many of you, because our walking working surface and the work that we do is not the same as a laborer, carpenter, electrician, pipe fitter, anyone else that's working on floors well below us. Our walking working surface, in many cases, for the duration of the project, is a wide flange beam until we get the decking up. So we have a much different set of hazards, and the steel erection differs from other construction trades in several ways. And that's why OSHA, federal OSHA, saw that your ironworker members are in a unique position as connectors that are much different. The hazard is much different than any other just average general construction worker, okay? But they need to be given consideration, training, instruction on the hazards, and when they're supposed to tie off anchorage points to protect themselves in the ring at all times, okay? So appreciate you recognize that, okay? And this comes down to the next question here, is when you get in these situations, and whether you're Pete or Tony or and maybe Rusty, what kind of notifications, what are ways that you respond to correct this, Tony? Okay. What are responses and written notifications to controlling contractors?
So I think that the deal with trade stacking has to happen really early on, pre-erection, right?
Yeah.
Because when we're sitting in a room and we're looking at a schedule, and the entire schedule of when the rebar guys are coming in, when I'm going to pour concrete on level 6 or what have you, we all need to sit around the table and say, look, there's no way that you can have the guys coming in behind us. If I'm scheduled to finish this floor, hanging it, bolting it, welding it out on Tuesday, you're going to have everybody else come in on Wednesday. That's just not realistic, right? It's just not. I think putting them on notice then, being able to communicate and come up with something that's realistic. And then as the job starts to progress, hey, if we can catch up time or bring those guys in early because, you know, we're hanging 150, 180 pieces a day instead of the 62 that we thought we would, then by all means, let's bring them on.
Yeah.
But if not, then we need to hold to what we agreed to and have you quit shoving other tradesmen and women up underneath of us, because it's not safe for them either.
Correct. And without naming any mega projects and one particular owner, this has been a common thread in the last series of fatalities across the nation. And just what you're talking about here has been a common thread to all of them. And I know you know that. And so it's people like you, Tony, and Rusty, and all of us working together, and Pete, that are trying to get this to be a focus in your pre-job meetings, just like you said. But another person on the line that has shared your pain and feeling is Pete Hayes. And Pete, did you want to have anything? Because what Tony just shared with us is being put in this position from a job schedule standpoint and these progress meetings. Did you want to make any comments on that? Because Pete Hayes works across the nation, Texas, California, all across the country.
Sure, Steve. I'll reiterate what Tony had said. We're seeing these accelerated work schedules that are just, they're happening in so many projects, and I agree completely. Somewhere somebody has to halt and say enough is enough. The human body can take just so much. Just the mental and physical fatigue that's going on in our industry. I really believe it's the hot button issue that we're facing. You know, we've gotten to where we all have one of these in our pocket, and we've gotten used to information and what we want right now. No thoughts to it. I can have groceries on my doorstep when I get home. So, but it still takes the human body getting out and doing this work in our industry. So that's why we felt this call was going to be so important, because we're just seeing it more and more. And I'll urge any contractor out there, any union member, reach out to Steve and his department, reach out to anybody that you can when you run into these. We want to do all we can to help and change the tide on this, change the course of where it's going. So
I agree, and I think getting involved in this early on, as Tony said a minute ago, is key. Is in your contract or in your negotiations, if you look at this work schedule, then is the time to make it be known about trade stacking and these other things. So I think getting involved early on is key to all this, as Tony said, and Pete, that you've reiterated as well. So with that.
Hey, Steve, just a quick note on the 2 floors or 30-foot issue.
Yes.
So about 3 months ago, I know you know the name Ed Falk, right?
Oh, yeah.
So Ed Falk inserted himself into, I'll just say, our business, because he works for a law firm now, and gave his interpretation of that compliance directive, to the point that the GC and the owner both took his interpretation as that's gospel because he's Ed Falk.
Well, guess what? Ed
I know what you're going to say.
Is dead guilty. When we had all the fatalities going on in the Las Vegas Strip, okay, Ed Falk was the Assistant Secretary of Labor of Federal OSHA. We confronted him at a press conference when he came to Las Vegas to pontificate at a national ASSE conference. He refused to talk about all fatalities going on 3 blocks from the MGM Grand where he was giving a speech. We tried to reach out with him because his misguided compliance directive that he refused to rescind back then was one of the primary causes of a local 433 guy, Rusty Billingsley, falling 60 feet to his death. But Mr. Falk refused to do that, okay, until he got to Las Vegas, and we had a meeting at the MGM Grand, and believe me, Ed Falk agreed with us, but he said, this was his quote, "Steve, I agree with you on this. However, Secretary Chow is unwilling to rescind any kind of compliance directives that her staff approved," quote, unquote. I said, Ed, you're the guy that every speech that you give, because I have copies of it that you post, is you say, my job is to make sure that workers go home to their families every day. I said, how can you stand at a podium and say that when you are not rescinding a compliance directive that's contributing to Rusty Billingsley's death and now other people's death, disabling injuries, falling object hazards? And guess what? Not too far after that, he was called into a congressional hearing in 2008, and Ed Falk started stuttering like Porky Pig, okay? Because he was under the thumb of the House Education and Labor Committee that presides over federal OSHA. And Ed Falk had no answers to their misguided thing other than they had to rescind it, okay? So
I'm with you. I'm just letting you know that exists, and you know, there's clients that have taken that, passed that to the next job, and just so you know it exists.
Tony, please send me Ed Falk's email or current cell phone number, would you? I would really like to touch base with him, okay?
I'll send you that verbiage as well.
Thank you very much. Well, this goes down to the next question here. This is final questions for our guest speakers. Pete, can you look at that? Wayne, Jeff, if there's any final questions for our great guest speakers?
Yeah, so we got one in the box right now. Basically, it's fairly long, but he's talking about general contractors that are beginning, and I've seen some of this, to push into second and third shifts rather than stack workers. So basically moving things into night work with lights, which is really pushing, especially if it's a steel erection, the most dangerous activities into those odd hours with poor lighting.
Yeah.
What can be done to combat this? What do you guys see in your thoughts there?
Wow. Light it up like a football field. If they want to work at night, that's their choice, right? They're going to have to light it up, baby. That's the only thing I can say. They can dictate 2 schedules, 3 schedules, working at night. That's their prerogative. They have that right. But if they do so, light it up. I don't want my guys, hook-on guys, to do something wrong. How could you mark centers in the beam when you don't have enough light? How could you read a tape measure? How could you see things that you normally wouldn't see because there's shadows, whether it's decking, walking work as service hazards, things like that. So lighting is very important if you work in these kind of late night conditions. Would you agree, Tony?
Absolutely. Yeah, if you want us to work at night, just know that you're going to be able to see that job site from 50 miles away.
Light it up policy. Anything else, Pete, Wayne, Jeff, any other comments pop up?
I am not seeing any at this time, Steve.
Okay. Jeff, any
Steve,
comments on behalf of
if
Canadian?
I could interject, Steve, sorry to interrupt. I do want to circle back to an earlier comment that Mr. Brown had made in regards to tool tethering and it not being a new concept. He's quite correct. My comment earlier about 12 years relates to tool tethering being used, in my experience, in a formal nature on projects in Canada. I mean, concerns about falling objects have been raised for over 100 years, to the days when dropped objects were happening in the street in New York, high pedestrian areas. I think it really needs to be that what Tony had talked about with conversations, and that our contractors, our employers, whether it's shop or field, they really need to look at the types of controls that are available through physical controls, procedural controls, and working with our members, the ironworkers, because they are doing the work. And to Pete's comment and to Tony, we're working long schedules, so there's fatigue that comes into play. So there's lots of areas that we need to do to work together to overcome this. In Canada, there's over 25,000 workplace incidents involving dropped objects every year that are reported to Canada's Workers' Compensation Board. So it's a major issue in Canada, but as well in the United States. Thank you.
Jeff, quick question for you. Is falling objects one of your 4 leading construction causes of death in Canada? Like ours is falls, caught between, struck by an electrical. Does that hold true for Canada?
Yeah, definitely. It's actually top 3.
Wow, top 3. There you go.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve.
Sure. Pete Hayes, any other following comments? Or from Wayne Crescent?
We don't have any other questions in the box. I don't know if Wayne has anything he wants to talk about before we sign off here.
Nothing here. Great job, gentlemen. Well done. Thank you.
Okay. Pete, I wanted to leave this on the screen for a couple minutes because when the COVID-19 issue came up, we had to come up with a better way for people to communicate with the safety department. I don't have to tell everyone online all hell was breaking loose with projects this, projects that. So thanks to Christy Rose, Jeff, and Wayne, we got an 800 number here where you can contact us through Ring Central. It'll come straight to our email. We can respond immediately, or you can send us a note to this website, and all of us get the phone calls and all of us get the email. So please reach out to us if you're a contractor, if you're an ironworker or local union, business manager or agent, please reach out to us. We want to help the best we can. We have Jeff in Canada, we have Wayne and myself, and 2 staff people to help us get out. We'll make this PowerPoint available. We'll always get requests to get a copy. We'll post a PDF file on the Ironworkers website and the Impact website. So anyone who wants to use this for reference material or instruction with your employees, we'll make that available to you.
All
So
right, Steve, we do have a question just popped in, a little off subject, but it's a good one, and I know you should be able to answer this. It's asked, is there any known hard deadline date coming for the requirement of switching to leading edge approved fall protection devices per OSHA?
That's been something that's been a dogfight between the manufacturers on who has leading edge protection devices that meets what Rusty says, the Z359 requirements on sharp edges and all this. And so I don't know that that's approaching. I think, oh, Rusty's back on. Rusty, could you help answer that, please?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the short answer is no. The long answer is if you don't have it, they're going to hit you with a general duty clause and tell you that you haven't met what is known in the industry. So be careful. But I mean, the leading edge, sharp edge approved devices is the other thing we found is, and I chuckle, it's not funny. It's just, it staggers my mind is that these manufacturers lie. And what I mean by that is they absolutely go back to a standard that is not even valid anymore and say that their products are leading edge, sharp edge compliant. And they put the word 2014 or the numbers 2014. Well, the new standard is not 2014. So just buyer beware and make sure you ask lots and lots of questions because, you know, unfortunately, Kiewit has found out the hard way and lost one of our employees a couple years ago, which is absolutely tragic. And person had the fall protection on, didn't have leading edge, sharp edge product. You can hear me speaking about it at multiple venues throughout the United States, but it's absolutely tragic, some of these manufacturers. And that's why it's so important that Steve and his group get on ANSI's E359 and continue to push the legislation through ANSI, and OSHA will incorporate that by reference. I've got a letter from OSHA, my comments to Lauren, specifically Lauren Sweat, Acting Director of OSHA, for that particular subject, as well as a myriad of others where they will incorporate by reference when citing contractors. So it is very important to make sure that you have leading edge, sharp edge product on your sites and on your people. It will give them the protection. You know, when we went through all this, the first people we reached out to was our ironworkers, and I will tell you, they were absolutely appalled and shocked by the lack of information that was provided by the manufacturers. We were ignorant. We are not ignorant anymore, and we've been pushing manufacturers to denote leading edge, sharp edge product and make it very clear on their product what is leading edge, sharp edge. But no, there is currently no movement within OSHA to require leading edge, sharp edge product.
That's a perfect answer, Rusty. And isn't it sad? Isn't it tragic when we have people that use fall rest equipment only to find out that they cut during a fall rest and it provides them no protection at all? Isn't that tragic and sad? And last year we lost a member because of a failure of a web retractable lanyard that was severed about 18 inches from the anchorage point because it went over a sharp edge. But yet our member was under the impression that that fall protection equipment, that he was complying to protect himself. But isn't it sad and tragic that that equipment provide to protect our member in a fall? It's just, it's very
and Steve, I hate to go. I've got another meeting I've got to go to, but I would be more than happy to come back on another monthly topic, and we can actually broach the subject of leading edge, sharp edge product and discuss it in length with all of your members and the folks that are here online.
Yeah.
So thank you for allowing me to participate.
I absolutely, always, Rusty. You're always welcome to the Ironworkers table. Let me tell you that. And thank you for all you do. And Tony, thank you for being here today. So Pete, back to you for some final wrap-ups.
All right. Well, we want to thank everybody for joining us. Great topic. Like I said, I really believe this is the hot button issue that we're going to be facing as an industry coming up as we see more these large mega projects being built with these really aggressive schedules. We need to do what we can to protect our workers, protect them, and not wear them out. So again, thanks everybody for joining us. We're going to have one more call this year, possibly even two. A lot going on in the world. It was refreshing to have a call where we didn't talk about COVID-19, but it's still out there, still going on. But we know that every day, men and women, iron workers and tradespeople are going to work on projects throughout Canada and the U.S. and putting their bodies out there on the line, getting things done. So it's our job to keep them safe and protect them. And this is just one of the venues we have to further that cause. So I want to thank everyone also for their time. And we look forward to the next call and participation. And as always, if you have more questions, reach out to Steve and his department. That 800 number is there. And we look forward to doing this again. So
Pete, I'm going to give a quick shout out to Christy Rose, who helps facilitate all this. She works with you. She works with us. She makes sure that all our guest speakers are comfortable with using the Ring Central. So where are you, Christy? Just wanted to say thanks and give you a little bit of special thanks recognitions. There she is, everyone. Yes, she is a real human being. No, she's not a cyborg. She's not Siri. She's actually there. You see her name on correspondence all the time. So just want to make sure that you guys know she's really there. Thank you, Christy.
great job, Christy. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete.
Okay, thanks everybody. Take care.
Take care.